I'm Mr. Brown, a instructor down in A-Flight. One of the problems that students have when it comes to flying instrument approaches is trying to figure out how to review an instrument approach plate. So I put together a couple videos here. I'm going to break it into 3 different videos so that it's not too long and too cumbersome to watch. And basically, I'm going to break that down into talking about the background and philosophy of reviewing an approach plate. I'll do a separate video on the end mailman technique for reviewing, and also a very common one known as the Z method. One of the problems that students have when it comes to reviewing an instrument approach plate is that there is no official mandatory method to use for reviewing an approach plate. If you go out on the internet and Google, or whatever your favorite search provider is, YouTube, whatever, and you search on how to review an instrument approach plate, you're going to find a couple hundred videos out there of people talking about how to do that. You do need to be careful about which of those videos you watch. There's 2 main designs for an instrument approach plate. NGA format that we use in the Air Force, DoD flip is an NGA format. And another common one is a company called Jeppesen. They're very similar, but there are some differences in how the approach plate is formatted and laid out. So you can watch a video on how to review a Jeppesen approach. The basic ideas are what we're looking for. Some of the details, because the format may be a little different. So I would recommend, to make it easy for you, stick with any videos and techniques that review an NGA format instrument approach. That's what you're going to have in your Aero app when you look at these things. So there is no official or mandatory way to do that. Even if your IP says you have to do it this way, there really is no set way. AETC Manual 11248 does list one suggested method called the end mailman. And paragraph 7.6.4 even states that it is a technique. It says there are many useful acronyms. Some of them commonly used are, and then it goes ahead and it tells you end mailman. And it tells you what the letters stand for, but it doesn't get into the details of how to do that letter, how to do that item. So some of the philosophy on that, the old AFI 11217 Vol 1, even the new 11202 Vol 3, AIM, if you look up how to review an approach plate, they do state that you must review the instrument approach plate prior to beginning a descent, whether that is via an en route descent, vectors to final, or prior to reaching your IAF and starting a descent on a penetration. Reason for that is you're about to fly what can be a complicated or at least a task-heavy procedure. So you want to review just to refresh yourself on what you're going to do, the altitudes, the restrictions, the lead points, things of that sort, to make sure that it's fresh in your mind. FAA handout 8083 16 Bravo does say that an instrument approach procedure briefing, a thorough briefing, greatly increases the likelihood of a successful instrument approach. So that's really at the bottom, at the crux of what we're talking about here, okay? You need to review something to the extent that you, as the pilot, are refreshed and ready to do. So there is no correct way. If you brief an instrument approach in the air to me, right then when you finish, I really can't say if that was a good briefing or a bad briefing. Now, granted, there are some things that I do want to hear that we as instructors and as pilots do feel are important. And if you don't review some of those things, such as minimum altitudes, weather requirements, we're starting to form an opinion that maybe your review wasn't very good, though. After the fact is the best time to tell you if your review was adequate or not. Like I said, a thorough briefing greatly increases the likelihood of a successful approach. So after the fact, if you were S-ing down final, you were rushed meeting your altitude restrictions, you were late getting configured, you couldn't reach the MDA prior to your VDP as we require in our course training standards, or if you can't fly it to the point of being in a safe position to proceed visually once you get to your decision altitude or your VDP at your MDA, if you spend so much time having to look over at your ETD that you've sacrificed basic aircraft control and fly a sloppy approach, then after the fact, we can come back and say, yeah, your review wasn't very good. We need to improve the things that we're looking at. What we expect is that things are familiar and fresh enough in your mind that you don't have to look at your ETD and have to look at that approach plate. You can, I mean, we do encourage it, but it becomes more of a, I'm cross-checking to make sure that I'm thinking the right number here, or I'm cross-checking my DME to make sure that what I'm thinking is the right number. On the other hand, if you fly a nice smooth approach, your task management's good, your SA's good, you have a nice effective cross-check, then you probably did a good job reviewing the instrument approach. Another aspect of reviewing the instrument approach is CRM, Crew Resource Management. Historically, CRM really took off back in the early to mid 1980s. You have other crew members that are on board your aircraft, and they're dependent on your pilot actions, and they have a stake in the outcome of the instrument approach. If you fly your aircraft into the terrain and lose an airplane and everyone's a fatality or just injured, then there's more than just the pilot team at stake here. The mission and other people are at stake. So back in the 80s anyway, in B-52s, we had a MAJCOM directive that actually said that all approaches must be reviewed out loud. They have to be reviewed by all members of the crew that had operational input. So that was the pilot, the co-pilot, because they have the instruments, they have the controls, but it also included our navigation team, the radar navigator and the navigator, because they had instruments themselves to monitor airspeed, altitude, course, so they could easily make inputs and catch when a pilot was making a mistake or committing an error. Once we were done reviewing that approach, we had to pull all of those positions, and they had to state that it was reviewed and then their crew position. Reviewed pilot, reviewed co-pilot, reviewed radar, reviewed nav. And that had to be done before every single approach. There were 4 people on board the airplane that could notice an error, notice a mistake was made, notice that somebody read the wrong number or misspoke or were thinking the wrong things. So nowadays, that's still an important thing. When you get to your follow-on unit, they're going to talk a lot about crew resource management. You have a sensor operator, at least, that is sitting there monitoring things, and they have a stake in the outcome of what you're doing. So if you're going to be doing some procedure, and it doesn't have to be an instrument approach, just simply whatever you're doing with the airplane, let the other person know what your plan is and what you're doing, so they have a chance to listen and say, hey, wait a minute, that doesn't sound right. Can you check that number? It also helps their situational awareness for what they're doing as well. So when you put that together, when you review an instrument approach out in your area on your sortie, we really want you to do it out loud. Now, do you have to? No, but it is highly, highly recommended that you do it out loud. Don't just do it out loud, but make sure that your instructor, your evaluator, your other crew member knows specifically that you're doing that so they can pay attention. They can open up their instrument approach plate, they can follow along, they can verify all of the numbers, the altitudes, the restrictions, and your actions. That way, try to catch any things that are misbriefed or misspoken on. Another thing to think about is your fence out time. That's not a time to start your A Doctor Who and Mailman fence out check or whatever series of acronyms you're using to accomplish these things. Fence out time is the time that you want to be leaving the area, headed towards Auger, if not leaving Auger. So you have to work that into things. How long is it going to take you to do your A Doctor Who, to get your ATIS, to review your approach, set up your nav aids, coordinate your recovery, and get the airplane leaving the area? So you're going to have to back that up. What that means to you is that you're going to have to practice whatever technique you use to review your instrument approach. You need to chair fly that. You need to practice that. You can't afford to sit there and say, okay, I'm going to review my approach. N. Let's see, what does N mean? Oh, yeah, nav aids. It needs to come quickly, come efficiently. We can't afford 20 minutes to fence out and get an instrument approach review done. So practice these things, become efficient and proficient in what you do. In summary, as long as you review the approach to the extent that you yourself needs, and there's no questions amongst the other crew members on board the airplane of what you're doing and how you're going to accomplish that, and you fly a good approach, you have good aircraft control, good SA, good task management, you break out, you're in a safe position to land, or maybe you don't break out, but you're in a safe position to execute that missed approach and fly the missed approach correctly, then you've done what AFMAN 11217, 202, 11248, and the FAA requires of you. In the next video then, we're going to get into talking about one of those techniques called the N Mailman. Thank you.